Okay, hello and welcome to this History at Night webinar. History at Night is an ongoing speaker series hosted by friends of San Felipe de Austin State Historic Site. My name is Eleanor Stoddart and I'm the educator here at San Felipe de Austin State Historic Site, and I'm going to be your host this evening. Tonight, the topic is Flags of the Texas Revolution with the lead educator from San Jacinto Battleground State Historic Site, Kate Johnson. This webinar will be recorded and posted online on our Facebook page, the YouTube video of the Texas Historical Commission, and our website. If you have any questions during this evening's discussion, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A section. We have staff members who may be able to answer your queries there, but we'll also share as many questions as we can with Kate after our discussion is through. We'll also share our contact information at the conclusion of this webinar. And as well, if you'd like to let us know where you're tuning in from, please let us know in the chat section. Before we get into Kate's presentation, I'd like to spend a little bit of time introducing her. Kate has been the lead educator at San Jacinto Battleground State Historic Site for just over 2.5 years. Before that, she has lived in a bunch of places. And in fact, we've even created a map to make it easier to keep track. She earned a bachelor's degree in anthropology from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and a master's degree in public history from the University of North Carolina, Greensboro. Now, following her university education, she taught elementary school English in South Korea for a few years. Then she joined the Peace Corps, serving in Morocco there, and where she focused on youth development. After that, she moved on to Alaska, completing two seasonal terms in Kotzebue with the National Park Service. Most recently, she has written 4 short movies that premiered this week. So check out San Jacinto, The Lone Star Shines, available on the San Jacinto Battleground State Historic Site Facebook page and on the Texas Historical Commission's YouTube channel. She also wanted me to remind you that the monument is open again on Wednesdays through Sundays from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. And now with that, we are going to turn this over to Kate, and let's begin our look at flags of the Texas Revolution.
All right, and let's see if I can't share my screen properly this time. So do y'all see a PowerPoint presentation?
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. All right, so like Eleanor said, I'm Kate Johnson. I'm the lead educator at San Jacinto Battleground. We're in LaPorte, Texas, so I'm just on the other side of Houston from San Felipe. So if you haven't come out to visit us, you definitely should at some point. And then before I start, I want to make a couple of notes. So first, I'm really focusing here on the flags of the Texas Revolution. So really starting mid-1835, running through the end of 1836. And I know there are a lot of flags before that kind of stretch into the Texas Revolution period. I know there are a lot of flags that come afterwards that have their origins in the Texas Revolution period. But with the exception of talking about the Lone Star flag, I'm really just focused on kind of that year and a half, because otherwise we would be here all night. Like, I got to draw a perimeter somewhere. So I apologize if I'm leaving out a flag that you're interested in. And maybe try to expand it later at some point. And I'm also, for this talk, just focused on the Texian flags. And we all know there's a whole second side of the revolution. There's a bunch of Mexican flags flying here. Actually, most of the flags that have survived the Texas Revolution are the Mexican flags. 4 were captured here at San Jacinto. But for this talk, I'm just focusing on the Texian ones. I'm going to go roughly in chronological order based on when the flags were created, not necessarily the events they are best associated with. And then a note to some of the sources, there is going to be a lot of speculation. Almost none of these flags survive. There are very few contemporary sources. So a lot of what we have to rely on was written long after the fact, and some of it wasn't even written by eyewitness accounts. So I'm going to try and be very clear about where I'm getting information from, where there is controversy, and where I am sharing my own opinion versus where I am sharing what is as best to my ability to determine what we know is fact. And then just a couple of notes on why bother, why look at flags? What's the importance of flags? We don't know a ton about them. Why is it worth studying? And I do think it is, because they're a way that we create an identity. They speak a lot to what people's mindsets are. And during this kind of 6-7 month revolution, people's mindsets shift a lot. And I think it's really interesting looking at how these flags change over this period of time to see how Texian opinions are starting to change as well. So I will start at the very beginning. So September 1835. The first flag of this period is either the Dodson flag or the Lynchburg flag, but I arbitrarily chose the Dodson flag to start with. So it was created by Sarah Dodson sometime in September of 1835 in Harrisburg for Captain Andrew Robinson's militia company. Her husband served as their first lieutenant. It was made out of calico and consisted of either either squares or rectangles, but either way, it was a much narrower flag than what we are traditionally used to. Blue, white, and red with a white lone star in the middle of that blue square. And when Lieutenant Dodson unveiled the flag to the company, he told them that the single star was like Texas, alone in her opposition to the government that was established by Santa Anna. So when I'm saying it's a way to look at it, what people are feeling about the Texas Revolution. Lieutenant Dodson kind of straight up says, this is an opposition to Santa Anna. It's an opposition to this centralist government. It's not necessarily talking about independence. However, when the Harrisburg Company arrived in Gonzales, Stephen F. Austin was worried that the flag was so revolutionary that he actually ended up asking them not to fly it for a little bit because he was concerned if the government commander in Behar saw it, it would be seen as like a declaration of independence. But he ends up changing his mind, and the Harrisburg Company does march under the Dodson flag to Behar. It might have been raised over San Antonio after the city was captured. And they weren't really sure what happens to it. For a couple of months, it disappears and then reappears in Washington on the Brazos in March of 1836. It's one of two flags that flew over Independence Hall during the General Convention. The next flag from about the same time period, about the same place, is the Lynchburg flag. And Lynchburg is actually like a mile from where I'm currently sitting in my office. So very close to where Harrisburg was. September 1835, William Scott, the captain of the Lynchburg militia, gave his second lieutenant, a guy named James McGahee, and I'm mostly basing this off of McGahee's account that he wrote several decades later. Gave McGahee 4 yards of blue silk and told him to have a flag made. So he goes to Frances Lynch. She sews a piece of cloth on the back of it so it would be a little bit more stable. And he takes it to a local painter named Charles Lanco, and Lanco paints that white star in the center of it. So according to McGahee's account, once the star was painted, Lanco looks at him and goes, well, now that looks naked. Let me paint something else under it. What should it be? And McGahee told him to paint the word independence. So we just talked about the Dodson flag, which is in opposition to Santa Anna, to his government, not necessarily in favor of independence. Lynchburg flag has gone the way opposite direction. And even at this really early stage in the revolution, there were people who were arguing for complete and total independence. It was not, some people really liked it. There was a story about a group of volunteers on their way to San Felipe, and they saw the flag and they told him it's just what the course, it's just the course for the state of Texas to take. But others really disagreed with it. So militia company in Harrisburg, and I could not find any reference whether this was the Robinson company that had the Dodson flag or if it was a separate one. But they were so upset about it, they threatened to shoot any man who attempted to raise a flag with the word independence on it before independence was declared by the proper authorities. So the next day, 2 boats of this militia company, they went down Buffalo Bayou, down to Lynchburg. McGahee ordered the militia company to organize. He plants the flag right in the center of the company. And the 2 sides just stare off silently for a while. And then finally, a captain of one of the boats, one of the 2 boats, orders his men to push out from the bank back in the middle of the bayou. And when it's midstream, he stands up, flourishes his hat, and shouts, "Hurrah for the Lone Star." And all his men join in, and there's lots of cheering. And clearly they decided they're in favor of the independence flag. But the other boat pulls away and doesn't say anything. So there's still a lot of disagreement. People are not sure what they're standing for, and people don't always stand for the same thing, even within one singular militia company. So McGahee carried the flag to the siege of Behar, but he was injured pretty badly at the Battle of Concepcion, and he gave the flag to a fellow soldier, Thomas Bell, who carried it during the grass fight, and then maybe even during the storming of Behar. And at that point, it kind of disappears from history. We don't know what happens to it. Next is the most famous flag from the Texas Revolution. I'm sure all of you are very familiar with that, the Gonzales or the Come and Take It flag. So it's not quite sure who created this. We know for sure it was the women of Gonzales, but a couple of different names were thrown out. Cynthia Burns, Evelyn DeWitt, Carolyn Zimwald, Sarah Seeley DeWitt. Possibly Sarah Seeley DeWitt created it out of her daughter's wedding dress. For sure, the women of Gonzales created it. They actually painted it, and that's pretty common for most of these flags. It wasn't sewed, it wasn't appliqued, it was painted on. It was created just days after the Battle of Gonzales to celebrate that battle. The best account of the Come and Take It flag is from Creed Taylor's memoir, Tall Men and Long Guns. And if anybody is interested in reading a little bit more about the Revolution, it is available for free online, and it's a really entertaining read, so I do recommend it. It's, again, Tall Men and Long Guns by Creed Taylor. So this is what he had to say with the decision to create the flag and the decision to march under it. Well, all this preparation for the early advance was being made, and he's talking there about the siege of Behar. The question of a flag came up. Some of our leaders wanted to march and fight under the Mexican national colors. Others wanted the eagle, cactus, and snake eliminated from the flag, and in their stead a star. But it was soon ascertained that the boys wanted nothing that bore the slightest resemblance to the flag of Mexico, and was finally decided by a committee that it was the duty of the consultation to design and adopt the flag of the new nation, and that any action in regard thereto would be premature and not binding. But in the view of the present conditions, it would be right and proper for the army to have a banner under which to march during the present campaign. And then they came up with the Come and Take It flag. And again, you kind of see that people were definitely upset. They were upset with Mexico. They definitely were upset with Santa Anna. They didn't really know how to fix it yet. So these early days of the revolution, you do get a lot of different subsets, people who wanted independence, but also people who wanted separate statehood, but wanted the Constitution of 1824 to be restored, but still wanted to stay a part of Mexico. And not being able to decide what exactly it is that they stood for, the army decided to march under the cannon. It was carried by Stephen F. Austin's volunteer army when they left Gonzales, but both the flag and the cannon were actually abandoned on the side of the road during the march. Again, pulling from Taylor's memoirs, our cannon flag had been left somewhere en route to Gonzales to the Salado. The last time I saw of it was on the morning when the cannon was abandoned at Sandy Creek. It had been furled and was resting against a sapling nearby. It may have been used as a winding sheet for the old brass gun, or may have been employed for baser purposes. And it's something you see a lot with these flags, is that they seem to have meant a lot less to people in 1835, 1836 than they do to us now. Not a ton of accounts of them. People aren't really writing about the flags they're seeing. Most of them kind of disappear from history. They're not something that people are taking care of and making sure are preserved. The army just left it on the side of the road, apparently. And it seems so strange because you see the Come and Take It flag everywhere now. I'm going to pass a couple on my drive home tonight. That's if y'all have it flying in your yards, then it seems very strange that it wasn't considered as important then. But they had bigger things to worry about. So next we're going to get to the 1824 flag. I'm going to try and get my mouse to move properly. And this is the flag out of the two that's going to have the most controversy surrounding it. So I'm going to start with what we know for sure. In October 27th, Captain Philip Dimmitt wrote to Austin. The letter exists, you can read it. And he said, I have had a flag made. The colors and their arrangement are the same as the old one, with the words and figures, Constitution of 1824, displayed on the white in the center. So it's purposely copying the Mexican tricolor, but replacing the national arms with the date 1824, which is a reference to the Constitution of 1824, which President Santa Anna had recently abolished. And there's accounts of a flag like this or similar to this in all parts of Texas. It did seem to spread pretty widely. Herman Ehrenberg of the First New Orleans Grays wrote that at the welcome banquet for his company, when they first entered Texas, the centerpiece of the banquet was a huge black bear holding the flag of the Constitution of 1824 in its teeth. And there's other accounts that are a little less dramatic. There's a chance that it would have been at the Alamo at some point. Dimmitt was primarily the commander of Goliad, but he did participate in the final assault of Behar, and he also visited the Alamo in late January of 1836 when he brought reinforcements. So it is possible that it made it out there. We're not sure. Which I say because this is the flag that is best. What flag did fly from the Alamo, and was it this one? What flag is Travis referencing when he says, "Our flag still waves proudly from the walls. I shall never surrender or retreat"? And for a long time, like the assumption was it was the 1824 flag. That's kind of long been considered the flag that flew during the Battle of Alamo, with the idea being that until Texas officially declared its independence, it was fighting for the restoration of the Constitution of 1824. And while independence had been declared before the Alamo fell, the defenders of the Alamo wouldn't have known that. They still would have been fighting under the flag of 1824. If you think to McCardle's famous painting, if you zoom in, it's actually its 1824 flag that's flying there. It's on the monument. It's in one of the friezes, although not actually flying over the Alamo. However, there are no contemporary sources that describe the 1824 flag of the Alamo, and it's not until histories of the Texas Revolution were being written in the 1860s that it's really included in the accounts of the siege. So a lot of modern historians are wondering how strongly Texians would have really identified with the Federalist cause by February. It's clear they probably would have identified with it in September, October, November, but things moved really fast during the Texas Revolution. And especially with Travis being the commander, he was not in favor of the restoration of the Constitution. He wanted independence. He had been agitating for independence for a long time. There are a couple of contemporary accounts of the Coahuila y Tejas flag at the Alamo, which you can tell looks pretty similar to the 1824 flag. Both of the accounts are from the Mexican side, a private journal of Colonel Juan Almonte, which was published in 1836. So it was a contemporary account. For the February 23rd entry, as the Mexican army was approaching San Antonio, he wrote, "The enemy, as soon as the march of the division was seen, hoisted a tricolor flag with 2 stars designed to represent Coahuila y Tejas. The president and all his staff advanced to Campo Santo, and the enemy lowered the flag and fled." And there's also a drawing from that same time period that was done by Lieutenant Colonel Jose Juan Sanchez Navarro of the garrison at the Alamo. And you can see what looks very much like that 2-starred flag. However, most historians think this is even more unlikely. If it was unlikely that the defenders of the Alamo were identifying with the Federalist cause, they really weren't going to identify with the cause of Coahuila y Tejas. That most Texians were pretty firm on the idea that they wanted separate statehood. If you want to know what I personally think, I don't think the 1824 flag was at the Alamo. It doesn't make a lot of sense. I also have no idea what flag would have been there. I haven't read anything, I haven't seen anything that gives a logical explanation of what would have been there. And that's one of those mysteries we might just never know an answer to. So despite that controversy about whether it was at the Alamo, the 1824 flag is distinctive because it's the first legal flag in revolutionary Texas. So in November 1835, the consultation began to issue letters of marque and reprisal to privateers, which were essentially like legalized pirates. Before Texas had a navy, they would authorize private citizens to go out and raid and harass Mexican ships. And all these ships that were authorized as privateers were required to fly the flag, the 1824 flag. And it continued to be used right up until independence was declared. So I think it's pretty cool. It's our first legal flag, actually. And then speaking of flags that were present at the Alamo, the flag of the New Orleans Greys was one of only 2 flags I'm going to talk about today that still exist. It was captured by the Mexican army after the fall of the Alamo. So the New Orleans Greys formed in New Orleans, not surprising, in 1835, October of 1835. They were organized into 2 companies. And one of those companies, which was led by Captain Thomas Breese, marched overland from Alexandria to Texas. And then shortly after they crossed the border, they were presented with a flag by the delegation of the citizens of San Augustine, which was this flag here. So they eventually made it out to Behar. They participated in the Battle of Behar. And then on December 30th, most of the company, about 120 men in total, most of them left San Antonio to join Dr. Grant's Matamoros expedition, and they eventually ended up with Fannon's command in Goliad, which is where most of them eventually died. Only 33 men stayed behind at the Alamo, but they did keep their flag. Then after the fall of the Alamo, the Gray's flag was captured by Santa Anna, and he sent it back to Mexico City, along with a note to General Tornell, his Secretary of War, that said, "The bearer takes with him one of the flags of the enemy's battalion captured today. The inscription will show plainly the true intention of the treacherous colonists and the abattoirs who come from parts of the United States of the North." And if you think back to like the Tornell decrees, which were signed in late December of 1835, where Santa Anna stated that any foreigners who took up arms against the Mexican government would be deemed as pirates. This is clearly something he was concerned about. And he took this flag, which does pretty clearly state that there were soldiers who came to the United States to fight, as proof of this is what's happening. And so the flag ends up in the collection of the Museo Nacional de Historia in Mexico City. Texas has made a couple of attempts to have it returned, possibly in exchange for the 3 Mexican battalion standards that were captured at San Jacinto, but nothing's really ever come of it. It was always concerned that it would be disruptive to American-Mexican relations. And then once that was really no longer an issue, there just wasn't a ton of interest. However, if you go to the Museo Nacional de Historia's Facebook page, just a couple of days ago, they did post a picture of this flag right in time for St. Jacinto Day, which I will be honest, I think is very funny. So if you'd like to see a more recent photo, you can find it on their Facebook page. And get to the Troutman flag next. This one is important because this is the source of some misconception about the Lone Star flag. So we got to set that straight. The Georgia Battalion was formed in November 1835 in Macon, Georgia. It's a very large company. By the time it reached Texas, it was 220 men. While they were on their way to Texas, they were presented by a flag made by Joanna Troutman, the daughter of the innkeeper in Knoxville, Georgia. So according to legend, Joanna was sitting out on the porch. She was gazing up at the night sky, and she saw one star that was brighter than all the others, and she cried out, "That star reminds me of Texas," and rushed back inside to design the flag. So a little bit more likely what actually happened was we do know that the battalion stayed at her father's inn as it passed through Knoxville, and she ended up sitting up and talking with one of the soldiers, John Lamar, who had previously visited Texas and understood a fair amount about the conflict. And Joanna proposed making a flag to help. Lamar was the one who actually suggested the basic design. And then once it was made, Troutman sent it ahead by coach to Columbus, Georgia, which is where it was actually presented. Unlike most of the others, this one wasn't sewn. The flag is made out of white silk, but the 5-pointed star is appliqued on either side. And then on one side is written Texas and Liberty, or possibly Texas and Death. And then on the other side is Ubi Libertas Habitat, Ibi Nostrum Patria Est, which is Latin for where liberty lives, there's my country. So the Georgia Battalion eventually ended up joining fellow Georgian James Fannin at the Presidio in Goliad. And on March 8th, when the news of the Texas Declaration of Independence reached the troop, it was a Troutman flag that was raised over the Presidio walls in celebration. But that evening, as it was being lowered, it was entangled on the halyard and it was ripped too badly to be saved. In fact, like a small piece of it was still fluttering from the flagpole when Fannin and his men left a week later. And most of the Georgia Battalion ended up dying with the Goliad Massacre. So for a long time, this was the flag that was supposedly the first Lone Star flag that was well into, the mid-20th century. Everything you look at says it's the first Lone Star flag, and it came from Georgia. And no, we've already talked about that. There are 2 Lone Star flags that were several months earlier. So sorry, Georgia, the Lone Star flag does not originate with y'all. It originates in Texas. So the next 2 flags, we're going to talk about 2 flags that are pretty similar and clearly influenced each other. So we'll start with the Bloody Arm flag. So this was raised in Goliad over the Presidio by the commander, Philip Dimmitt, on December 20th, 1835, to celebrate the signing of the Goliad Declaration of Independence. which stated that Texas ought to be a free, sovereign, and independent state. This is a couple months before the actual Declaration of Independence was signed. And if the name Philip Dimmitt sounds familiar, it's because I mentioned it very recently when I talked about the 1824 flag. So Dimmitt, just 2 months earlier, had created the 1824 flag to represent his loyalty towards Mexico and the Constitution of 1824. And now, just over 2 months later, here he is making another flag to support the Goliad Declaration of Independence. So it's a pretty dramatic shift for him. And while a pretty dramatic shift that's kind of going on throughout Texas, the further we get to 1836, the more and more people start actually talking about independence. Although not everybody shared the sentiments. Right after it was raised, somebody actually shot at the flag. And then when Grant and his men for the Matamoros expedition came through, he forced them to take it down. That was on January 10th. And then Dimmitt and his men left Goliad. They took the flag with them. And nobody knows what happens to it until it resurfaces in March, where it flew. Most likely it was the flag that flew alongside the Dodson flag at Independence Hall. And then there is the second flag that was designed by William Brown. We're not sure which one came first, but it is pretty obvious that they, one influenced the other pretty heavily. Obviously the bloody arm is pretty distinctive, but the two men did know each other. They both were signers of the Goliad Declaration of Independence. We're not really sure what that bloody arm represents. It's very dramatic, but there's no consensus at all. Some historians have speculated that it was related to Irish folklore. There was a pretty large Irish population near Goliad. Others think it might be an association with pirates in the Caribbean. Nobody knows, I'll be honest. So we're going to get to the flag that's nearest and dearest to my heart now, the Liberty flag. So it's the only confirmed Texian flag that flew at the Battle of San Jacinto. So there were probably other flags. There's a couple of references to two flags, but they don't go into any detail about what the two flags were. Not unusual to think that another company might have had its own flag. There might have even been a flag that represented the entire army, but there's no descriptions of it. The only flag we know for sure was here is the Liberty flag. It was presented to the Newport Rifle Company, which was commanded by Colonel Sidney Sherman right before they left for Texas in mid-December 1835 by Sidney Sherman's brand new wife, Catherine. So before they left, the troops were being entertained in Newport. And according to legend, Private James Austin Sylvester, who is actually the one who captured Santa Anna just a couple months later, asked one of the young women in town for a memento to take with him to Texas. And she pulls off her glove and gives it to him, saying, "Here's a gauge of battle, let it be borne foremost in the fight." And Sylvester ties it to the top of the flagpole and tells her, "I take it as a pledge of victory and shall die before I surrender it to a foe." And it becomes a good luck talisman for the company as they continue to march down to Texas. It was handmade from 3 pieces of silk, either blue or white. There's unfortunately not enough of the original flag to really be able to tell. And in the center of it is this bare-breasted woman grasping a flag in one hand, and there's draped over it is a streamer with the words "Liberty or Death." And it's probably based on a painting by Eugene Delacroix, "Liberty Leading the People," which is from the July Revolution of 1830, which is one of the many French revolutions. And so after the battle, the flag ends up at the Secretary of War's office and is eventually sent back to Mrs. Sidney Sherman. And her family keeps it for a long time. It's eventually presented to the state in 1896, and it currently flies, it's currently on display in the House of Representatives. It's one of the only flags, one of the only 2 flags to have survived from this time period. It is in really bad shape. Only about 40% of only about 10% of the entire flag remain, and only about 40% of that similar image, which is why if you've seen depictions of it, they often look so different because it's a very detailed design, and because there's very little left, it's pretty hard to figure out what it exactly looked like. So now we're going to get to the flag that I know is nearest and dearest to my host's heart. This is Austin's flag. So the consultation appointed Stephen F. Austin along with William Wharton and Branch T. Archer to be commissioners to the United States. So they were there to raise money and support and troops for the revolution. And on January 18th, while he was in New Orleans, Stephen F. Austin wrote a letter to Gail Borden back in San Felipe proposing a new national flag for Texas. So the proposed flag is pretty clearly based on the United States flag, but there's a whole lot of additional symbolism. And I'm just going to read what Austin has, actually what's written right down here. So he says, idea for an independent flag. The shape of the English jack in the corner indicating the origin of the North American people. The stripes indicate the immediate descent of the most of the Texians. The star is Texas, the tricolor is Mexican. And it's interesting, kind of like the Dimmitt flags that we just talked about, it does represent a shift in thinking. So Austin was not originally for complete and total independence. He preached cooperation with Mexican liberals. He preached the restoration of the Constitution of 1824. But in this same letter to Borden with the flag, he also writes, I shall preach independence all over the US wherever I go. And this is January 1836. So you're seeing this, this movement more and more towards desire for independence. So after Austin sends this original sketch to Borden, he decides to share it with his fellow commissioners. So Branch T. Archer and Austin revised the original design. They replaced the star with a sun with the head of George Washington in the center of it, and then rays surrounding it representing the light of liberty. And then they added the motto, where liberty dwells, there is my country, which if you think back to the Troutman flag is very similar. And they changed the colors, so it's not green and white stripes, it's now blue and white stripes. So it's getting rid of the Mexican tricolor. And they show it to their fellow commissioner, William Wharton, and his thoughts were, and I'm going to read it because it's pretty funny. I object much to the hackneyed quotation, where liberty dwells, there's my country. It's frequently used by schoolboys as a motto, and by volunteer companies on their banners have reduced it stale and fulsome. Virgil, from whom it's taken, expresses the sentiment authentically. If we are to have it at all, let us express it in Latin. But I should much prefer that the motto be discarded and the words, the light of liberty. And then underneath Washington, I would have the words, in his example, there is safety. And Austin apparently had no problem with these changes. So Austin, fantastic at state making, not so great at flag design. So this flag is never made, probably thankfully. However, Gail Borden does decide to make a flag that is based on the original description. And he prints a description of it in the Texas Telegraph and Register, but the picture is not ended up being printed. So this is not necessarily what that Gail Borden flag, which he presents to Captain Mosley Baker, looks like. And I know that the flag that San Felipe de Austin shows is a little bit different. Everyone's just trying to kind of figure it out based off that mishmash of words I read earlier. Baker and his company go on to fight at San Felipe, at San Jacinto. There's a chance this is one of the other flags that's mentioned in passing. We're not sure if it's out at San Jacinto or not. So this is another flag that's got some controversy surrounding it. This is the De Zavala flag. So March 3rd, the day after Texas Declaration of Independence is signed, Thomas Gasley motions that a committee of 5 be appointed to devise and report to this convention a suitable flag for the Republic of Texas. And the president of the convention, Ellis, appoints Thomas Gasley, William B. Skates, Lorenzo de Zavala, Sterling C. Robertson, and Thomas Barnett to that committee, and then he eventually ends up adding himself on Houston's recommendation. And then the next mention of it is on March 12th, when William Skates motions the rainbow and star of 5 points above the western horizon, and the star of 6 points sinking below was added to the flag Mr. Zavala accepted on the Friday last. If you look at the other 2 Fridays, during that time period, there's no mention of the flag, but apparently was accepted. And then Charles Taylor introduces a resolution that the words Texas be placed 1 letter between each point of the star on the national flag. And that's about all we know officially about the De Zavala flag. There's no evidence that the convention officially accepted the flag, that it became legally the national flag. there's a chance that there are things missing in the notes that we have from the General Convention. They mentioned that they had accepted a proposition on Friday. We have no evidence of that. And then there are some kind of scant mentions of this flag existing. Much later, the Zavala family claims that they've made it, that it gets lost. They're trying to get the original one back. There's not a ton of evidence to what the original flag looked like, what the flag that possibly was made looked like. It's kind of part of the fun, but also the frustrating part of this sort of historical evidence is that we are very beholden to what people, A, chose to write down, and B, chose to preserve. So we know there was a flag that was proposed by Lorenzo de Zavala. We don't know what that flag looked like. All we know is what people proposed to change to it. We know that maybe a flag was made, but we don't know what that flag looks like. We don't know where it ended up at. There were no contemporary accounts. So maybe we'll end up finding something new. Stuff is always being discovered. Stuff is always being translated. It'd be really neat to know more about this potential first flag of Texas. But as of right now, that's kind of what we got. So up to this point, all of these flags that I've talked about, the only one that had any degree of legality behind it was the 1825 flag that was flown by privateers. But that changes on April 9th, 1836, when President Burnett stops in Harrisburg and signs a decree designating the Texas naval flag. And it seems a little bit strange that there's not a national flag for the Army, which is about to fight to march under, but there is a national flag, that there is a naval flag. However, it was really important that the Texas Navy had an official flag to fly under because ships that waged war without a recognized flag were considered pirates. So the Army could do what it wanted, didn't have to have the same sort of legal authority. It was really important that the Texas Navy, which was going to encounter British ships and American ships in the Gulf, that they have an official flag to fly under. So you notice it looks very similar to the US flag, but there's only one star instead of the 24 stars that the US flag had in 1836. And that is not a coincidence. So Oliver Jones, who was the chairman of the committee that eventually proposes the Lone Star flag, says that in the early part of the year 1836, the president ad interim devised a national flag, as was in the case of emergency, adopting the flag of the United States of America. The flag was expedient for the time being and has in many instances been beneficial to our Navy and merchantmen when encountered by enemy forces on account of it being so much blended with the flag of the United States of America. So that was very much on purpose. Mexican ships would have had no problem tangling with a Texian ship. They were going to be a lot more concerned about messing with an American ship. America had a much larger Navy, and also they weren't at war with America. And this remained the official naval flag until 1839, when it was replaced by the Lone Star flag. So we're getting close to the end. Texas finally gets its first official national flag on December 10th, 1836, when Houston approves an act creating the national standard of Texas. And it's also sometimes called the Burnett flag because it was proposed by President Burnett. And this flag here, blue background, gold star, it serves as the official flag of Texas until it was replaced in 1839 by the Lone Star flag. So that's going to be the final flag that I talk about. It is a little bit past the time period that I'm looking at. However, it's really hard to talk about the flags of Texas and ignore the flag of Texas. September 1836, Texas voted overwhelmingly in favor of annexation to the United States. The actual vote is 3,277 to 91. So Texans were really in favor of becoming a part of the United States. But when the Texas minister in Washington, D.C. proposed annexation to the Van Buren administration, he was told that it wouldn't even be considered. Their official reasons were it was fear of war with Mexico and also concerns over whether or not it was constitutionally legal to annex an existing country, but also maintaining that delicate balance between free and slave states prior to the Civil War was a likely obstacle because Texas would have insisted on entering as a slave state. So in 1838, Texas withdraws its annexation offer. And then in December 28th of 1838, William Morton, who dabbled in a bit of flag making with Austin a couple years previous, introduces a bill to amend the 1836 Act, which established the national standard. It's referred to a committee consisting of Oliver Jones and 2 unnamed senators. And they, a couple weeks later, reported a substitute bill containing the same basic design. That bill was passed by Congress on January 21st, 1839, and approved by President Lamar on January 25th, 1839. And in that original bill is this drawing that you see right here. It was done by Peter Kemp, who was an Austin artist. He did not design the flag. He was brought an idea, and he was the one who actually drew it. He drafted it with language that they used. He was paid $10 for it, which would be about $200 in today's money. And Oliver Jones states pretty clearly that the reason that they want to have a new flag now is that they wanted a flag that was not similar to the United States flag, because they weren't going to become a part of the United States anymore. So there's a bit of a reaction to having that request for annexation shot down, but we ended up with a really cool flag as a result. So when I was researching this, I assumed, despite all of the research I've done and how familiar I am with how little we know about this, that we know who designed the Lone Star flag. It is such an important part of Texas identity in a way that really I can't think of another state flag is. And surely we know who designed it. We do not know who designed it. So this is where we get to the controversial part, and I'm going to lay out how we kind of ended up with a name that is often thrown around, and then talk about some of the issues with that. So the name that you're going to hear most commonly is Charles B. Stewart. Even the Texas State Historical Association's Handbook of Texas, the entry on Stewart claims that he was the one who designed the Lone Star flag. And there have been a couple of resolutions that were passed by the state legislature that have credited him as the flag's designer. So Stewart was born in 1806 in Charleston, South Carolina. He moved to Texas in 1830. He was definitely at the General Convention in 1836 because he signed the Declaration of Independence. And then he represented Montgomery County in the House of Representatives 3 separate times, but after statehood, not during the Republic of Texas era. And then in 1922, after Stewart had died, his son claimed that his father and Lorenzo de Zavala were appointed by President Lamar to a committee of 3. So this is presumably the one that Senator Oliver Jones is over, to design the Texas flag. And he says his father was the one who designed it and displayed what he claimed was Stewart's original drawing of the 1839 flag and seal. And that's that one right there. So the story gets picked up by Mamie Wynn Cox's book, The Romantic Flags of Texas, which was published in 1939. And she also relied on a lot of reports from Stewart's granddaughter, who identified 3 members of the congressional committee as Stewart, Jones, and Wharton, and then said that Stewart drew the original flag on a piece of oil linen. And it was then signed by President Lamar on January 25th, 1939. So you can see where the signature is right there. Then you can also, this is it flipped around, so it's upside down on both images. So this is it kind of right way up, so same one right there. So then this is then repeated by Charles Gilbert in his 1864 book, A Concise History of Early Texas, 1519 to 1861. And then Gilbert even elaborates on the claim, saying that Stewart's design was approved by a committee consisting of Lorenzo de Zavala, William B. Skates, Thomas Burnett, Sterling Robertson, Thomas Gazzi, and Richard Ellis, which if those names sound familiar, it's because I just mentioned them when I was talking about the Lorenzo de Zavala flag. Those were the men that were appointed to the committee in 1836, the General Convention. So there are some issues with this whole story. So first off, Gilbert's claim, and he's clearly gotten the 2 flag committees confused. Also, a lot of these reports say that Lorenzo de Zavala served on the committee with Charles Stewart. The only problem with that is that he is dead by 1839. He died in 1836. And then second, Charles Stewart was not a member of the Texas Senate in 1838. And even if he was, President Lamar would not have appointed him to a Senate committee. And while neither of these facts actually precludes Stewart from serving on the committee, I personally find it really unlikely that much of a deviation from the norm would not have been commented on. People tend to, they comment and they write down what is unusual, and nobody said anything about that I find that unlikely. And then the two images are incredibly similar, including the upside down signature that is on the same day. The Stewart picture, the image, has been given to the Texas State Library and Archives Commission, but they've been unable to authenticate it because it was laminated prior to the donation, which is to conserve it, but that makes it pretty much impossible for any sort of authentication. My personal opinion here, I don't think Stewart created it. I think there's too many holes in this issue. And also, Stewart never claimed he did. His son and granddaughter claimed he did. Stewart was dead by this point. I also don't think we know who created it. It was Jones, Wharton, and whoever those two unnamed senators were. So that kind of takes me to the end. We're up to 1839, so I'm past the revolution at this point. But before I end though, the way this whole project started for me was back last summer. We decided we were going to replace the 6 flags that were flying in front of the San Jacinto Monument. 6 flags are great. They tell a really broad story of Texas history, and we're focusing on a much more narrow story of Texas history. So we're going to replace the 6 flags with these 6, what we're calling the 6 revolutionary flags of Texas, representing kind of 6 key moments. And there's also been some discussion in the future we might end up flying an alternate series sometimes, like the 6 flags of San Jacinto, to include the Mexican battalions that were found, the battalion standards that were found out here, the Liberty flag. So it's been a fun dive into the flag history of Texas and what that represents. And I've really enjoyed it. And I've really enjoyed getting to share that with y'all here today.
Oh, well, thank you very much, Kate. No, we appreciate that. And of course, you know, we love the fact that the San Felipe flag, of course, is flying. Okay, so I'm going to jump back.
I'll go back so you can see it.
Yes, okay, back to, we'll see. Oops, I will go forward a little bit. No, maybe not. Maybe I will not go forward. Okay. Okay, now we're going to jump into our question and answer. And we've had a bunch of questions roll in. And if you have more questions, please don't hesitate to let us know what they are. Okay, and I think you've pretty much covered this. This was an early question that came in. And so they were asking, so the Dodson flag is the origin of the Lone Star? Did you pick that one up?
Yes, it's a long and short answer. It is hard to believe that that was not one of the major contributions. It's so similar. It would have been something they definitely would have been familiar with. There's a couple of flags that look similar to the Lone Star flag. Actually, I believe it's the Chilean national flag, which people keep using the emoji. And somebody will slide into the comments and be like, oh, just a note, that's not actually the Texas flag, that's the Chilean flag. But yeah, the Dodson flag would have almost certainly been one of the major inspirations.
Okay, okay, we've got another question. Is the Almonte account the best eyewitness account of the Alamo flag from the Mexican Army?
Yes, it's the only written account that I have found, and then there's that drawing, but yeah, Almonte is by far the best written account.
Okay, do you have any evidence of the Come and Take It flag being connected to the Battle of Thermopylae?
I do not.
Yeah,
but I would love to hear what's up with that.
So I thought, okay, there's an interesting one to stump you with for sure.
Yes.
So yeah, I don't blame you for not knowing if to answer that one. And then I don't know if everyone is aware, but our site manager, Brian McCauley, is the one who's writing all the questions on the board for me to ask Kate. And he came forward with a fun trivia, supposedly from us. There is a tantalizing suggestion that one George Washington version of the Austin flag may have actually been made. A Nashville newspaper noted the visit by the Texans and suggested that the ladies of Nashville presented their distinguished visitors with a design of their interesting George Washington flag. So it may not be as out there as we originally thought, and we actually have some proof that it was made.
I would love to see that if it exists.
Did you say that Charles B. Stewart has a connection to Montgomery, Texas?
Yes, so he represented Montgomery 3 times after statehood, and he lived there for a long time. I believe he has descendants who are still living there. So they do very much claim that it is, it was created by him, and that's the Montgomery County is the birthplace of the Lone Star flag. And personal opinion is it's not.
Exactly.
I think we don't know enough to say one way or the other.
Sounds good. I was trying desperately to work in a mention of the word vexillology, which is the study of history, symbolism, and usage of flags. And I noticed, that you also did not manage to use that word either, possibly
It's
because
a hard one to pronounce.
it's pretty much impossible.
Yeah.
For sure. Okay, Brian, do we have anything else that you think? Okay, well then I think we are doing fairly well for our questions. Give you a last minute to throw any others in if you might have. Otherwise, we will wrap it up and I will let you know what's happening next month.
And before you do, if people have any questions or want to see my bibliography for this, shoot me an email. I think it's going to be put up later, and I will definitely send that to you.
Yes, we will definitely have our contact information. If you suddenly wake up in the middle of the night and have a burning question, we will try to help you out.
So if anybody has any the connection to the Battle of Thermopylae, I would love to know more.
Okay, hang on, I will see one. Let's see if we've got more. Oh, do you know where anybody could, okay, if you were looking to purchase a copy of Juan Almonte's account, do you have any idea where you could track one down?
I found it on JSTOR. It says an article. Yeah. And if you have a Houston Public Library account, you have free access to JSTOR.
There's a lot of different ways to get a free account.
Yeah.
So yes, please definitely look into it. It's well worth it.
Somebody, if you're curious, send me an email and I'll send you the exact title of it. I don't remember it off the top of my head, but.
Cool. Do you have any thoughts or speculation of the background of the San Jacinto flag? On the background of the San Jacinto flag?
For like the plain background, I've heard blue, I've heard white. At this point, there's no real distinct color that you can tell.
Maybe more the symbology of it.
The symbology. So you see a lot prior to the Civil War, really, and there's this kind of idea of manifest destiny, people moving west. This female figure, often like holding a sword or something, it gets repeated a lot. So the idea of the female figure representing liberty is not new at all, and I would assume it has something to do with that.
Sounds good. What materials were these flags made out of? I know we were talking about the wedding dress. What else can you say?
Some of them were silk. We know calico a couple of times. It seems like it's a lot of whatever people could get a hold of. Silk is mentioned a lot. The Troutman flag was silk. The Liberty flag is silk. And a couple of the other ones were silk. The Dodson flag specifically mentioned that it was calico. The Lynchburg flag was silk.
It definitely makes sense. Yeah. Honestly, if you're in a hurry and you're making a flag, you're going to be grabbing whatever is out there.
Yes.
Okay. Well, we would like to say, sorry.
I think also an easier fabric to paint on than say like a cotton. And most of these were painted designs.
Fair enough. Okay, we are going to do our final wrap up. And of course, oh my goodness, I'm having a hard time moving my slides here. Okay, here we go. As usual, we try and wrap or connect something with our museum store. So right now we've got a flag special that they are arriving next week. Unfortunately, we don't have them yet, so I don't have a cool picture of them for you. But basically the 6 flags that you see here, we have a set of 6 of them that are all desk sized. It'll be available in our museum store. And if you are from out of town and would like a version of it, give us a call. And it will be priced at about $40 with tax and shipping a little bit extra. Then next month, we've got Dr. Sean Kelly from the University of Essex, and he's the author of Los Brazos de Dios, a plantation society in the Texas borderlands, 1821 to 1865. Let me just see, yes. He will be speaking on May 27th, and actually it's going to be a recorded program. Because he will be broadcasting from England, and therefore with the time change, we're going to record it ahead of time and broadcast it for you. And then in June, we've got James Harkins of the GLO Archives, and he will be talking about some of the Austin Colony treasures that the General Land Office has. And just so you know, in September, we're talking about starting to hold in-person History at Night sessions again. And we're also tossing around ideas of how we can have both in-person and an online component. So all of you from out of state, I guess we actually had people from Iowa, Ohio, Massachusetts, and California tonight, which is pretty amazing. And we'd like to keep sharing some of our content with you all. One more thing that is coming up on Saturday, I will be running a baking workshop here at San Felipe. So come and join us for a virtual behind the scenes look at our new bake oven we have constructed. I have been practicing over the last couple of weeks, and you'll have the chance to cook along with me. I've got an 1828 recipe that I will be making, and I've practiced it in both a modern oven and the bake oven, and it works out both ways. So I think I can pull this off. So tune in for that. And finally, I would like to thank the Friends of San Felipe de Austin State Historic Site who supports us in these efforts for our History at Night program. We also like to thank all our volunteers and employees that help us out with this. And then I think with that, I did promise you our contact information. So if you have any questions, like to know more, please drop us an email or give us a call, and we'd be happy to answer your questions. And with that, thank you very much for tuning in tonight, and we hope you have a good rest of your evening. So.
Yes, I agree.